Hi, I'm Elaine. What do we need to know if we're going to be a full stack developer? Well, there are many different things, starting with model view controller frameworks. For example, Symfony and Laravel, which you can implement in PHP. You have the Java Spring framework, C#'s .NET model view controller framework, and Ruby on Rails just for starters. So there are many different frameworks that allow you to implement using the model view controller, which is a multi-tiered or n-tier approach where you separate the data from the presentation and the business logic. So I'll just take you through an example. The model involves the data. Now this generally will be related to creating a class, and that class then interacts with a database in some way. So the model is actually, for example, the class that describes the data that you wish to store, and then around that somebody needs to create some scripts to actually store the data into a database such as MySQL or Mongo, and use some language, for example PHP or C#, in order to interact with it. Now, some of the frameworks available will actually allow you to automatically create the scripts that deal with the database entries in today's solutions. So some of the later versions of C# and Java and in fact PHP will allow you to create a data class and then provide you with some helpful methods that will allow you to insert and update and delete using the CRUD approach. So create, read, update and delete. So that's worth knowing about. It's also worth knowing about the data files that could be used to transmit the data. So this is a quick overview, so I'm not going into too much detail here. As for the controller, this is the interface between the model and the view, so it responds to user interactions such as buttons and drop-down menus, and again involves some scripting. The view is to define how to display data, and you can use many different technologies to create the view, and the view is called from the controller, so depending upon the user interaction, it will build the data and then call the view, which is how the data is displayed on the web page. So it's worth knowing something about Bootstrap or W3.css, which is a newer version of a framework for HTML and CSS, and .NET Razor for C# is worth knowing, as is HTML and CSS and JavaScript. You may find yourself looking into other components such as Google Charts API or other APIs such as Facebook's API. In terms of protocols, the internet runs on TCP/IP, so it's worth understanding what that is. And names are resolved into IP addresses, so a little bit about address resolution protocol. DHCP is used to provide an IP address to clients, and so it's worth understanding a little bit about that if you're going to set up your own web server. And DNS is used to convert domain names to IP addresses. Again, if you're setting up your own system, then this is worth knowing about. File transfer protocol has the client and the server for allowing you to upload and download files to a web solution. And finally, HTTP is the protocol used for transmitting hypertext across the internet. So that is used by the World Wide Web, and that's worth understanding as well. In terms of communications between different components, you may want to use TCP/IP sockets, which transfer byte stream data. So you can have a web script on the server talking to another process on the same machine or on a different machine using raw sockets. You can use alternatively procedure calls or methods using RPC or RMI. So that's instead of sending byte stream data, you interact with a procedure or a method remotely. And WebSockets are using HTTP in order to interact with another process via sockets, and they use various data formats for transmitting the data. HTTP is as already mentioned, is used for transmitting data via the World Wide Web, and an example of this is the RESTful protocol or the RESTful approach, and this is using JSON predominantly, although you can transmit different types of data. This is the one that you'll find mostly used. And Simple Object Access Protocol is commonly used a lot of the time by the larger implementations, uses XML. So that might be something to look into if you wanted to make sure that you're equipped with knowledge in a variety of technologies. It's also important to understand the standards. For example, the W3C consortium. There is a whole web page on this. So if you look up W3C standards, you can go to their web page. Another area to look at are the validation tools. For example, you will need to validate your web pages to make sure they conform. So we can choose HTML validator, and what you can do there is type in a website. I'm not sure if mine has been checked lately. So you just type in the website and you receive some error messages. So this is using Angular, and it's not very happy with the Angular coding that I've entered into that website. And then we also have, you can upload a file or type the HTML directly in there. We also have CSS validator as well. So you can put into here CSS, and again look for the main one here, which is defined as a trustworthy site, and it's very similar. So you will start to recognize using the logo. There's also another one for accessibility that you might want to run your website through as well. Another area that you should understand is graphic design. You may not be a graphic designer, but you should have some skills and some understanding of what's involved. So you need to make sure that you receive your images from a graphic designer in the right format, such that you can transform them into different file formats. For example, portable network graphics is used for images on websites, but if you need to have a higher quality image, you will use a JPEG. So it's worth understanding the different types of format, not only to back up your website into a zip or tar or raw file, but in order to get the right format for your website, for your videos and for your audio. Another area is to understand about different accessibility issues such as Erland syndrome, color blindness, and just understanding what colors work together and what fonts work for different browsers. You'll see here I have a link to Font Awesome icons, which I will just take you to now, and you can have a look at what they are. You can use these icons on your web page for free, although you would need to pay for some more advanced icons. And you just have to click and it tells you how to use it. You paste this into your code and there you are, you have this icon on your web page, and you can choose different sizes as well. So that's Font Awesome icon. It's also worth understanding how people interact with your website, the different components such as progress bars, call to action, buttons, switches, pickers, etc., and the layout and positioning of items on a website. So a little bit of human-computer interaction and an understanding of the user experience. So as already mentioned earlier, you need to know something about the data file formats, because a lot of the time websites are transmitting data to each other or providing data as a service. Often they'll provide data in XML format or JSON format as shown at the bottom, or in standard comma separated value format. There are many tutorials on these formats and they are worth understanding. Again, you want to understand different types of browser, so you want to be testing your website in the multiple browsers to ensure that they work on all of them or as many as possible, especially the most popular browsers that people tend to use. And you want to make sure that your website runs across multiple platforms and is responsive to the different types of device. In terms of a web server, when making yourself a web server or choosing a hosting solution, you might want to consider the different types of web server. Apache and Nginx are very popular for your PHP, Tomcat for Java, and Internet Information Service for Windows, but there are many others that you might wish to have a look at, experiment with, do some analysis before you decide. In terms of operating systems, you have many choices out there. Again, they will each have an impact on other aspects. For example, what you develop with, what web server you use. In terms of development environments, there are so many of these around. For example, PHP Storm or Zen Studio for PHP. Visual Studio is popular for C#. Java, Eclipse is for multi-platform development, but predominantly used for Java. IntelliJ, again for Java. Standard text editors such as Notepad++ or text editor on Linux or Mac. So there are many different editors. Again, it's up to you to explore and experiment to see what works for you. Now, in terms of managing your source code, a popular version control system is GitHub, but you have many others around, and again, that depends on the environment you're working on. Might depend on the organization you end up working for as well, but it is worth looking at GitHub or Git, and you can set up your own Git server. The staff or your team can actually use that server instead of github.com, the online version. So you also need to know how to do some testing, and Selenium is a very nice, reasonably new tool that allows you to do automated testing on your website. But there are others as well that you might want to look at. Again, do some comparison, analysis, and evaluate which one works for you best. When it comes to hosting your website, I've already mentioned that you have different operating systems. So you then need to choose which type of solution you wish to receive. Do you want a free hosting solution where there may not be any service level agreement, and you may often find adverts on your website and you can't guarantee that it'll be running or that your data will be safe? Business hosting, you have various packages available there with different types of plan. If you've got, say, so many gigabytes of storage with so many databases, so many websites that can be hosted. A virtual server is a server that is shared with others, but you have your own machine, and then you can reboot it, reinstall it, and do whatever it is you need to do. Now, dedicated server is similar, but it is your own actual server as a data center that you can do whatever you wish with, within reason, of course, in terms of the software installation and configuration. And then you have a cloud server, which is a pay-as-you-go service that can scale up and scale down according to your needs. With the different hosting solutions, you get offered a control panel to manage your environment. So two popular ones here, cPanel and Plesk, that you need to consider which one you would like to have, which one you prefer to use. Other skills that you need to know. You need to keep up with web trends. There are many other skills you need to know and keep up with, for example, web trends, search engine optimization, analytics for your website, and website promotion. In addition, you may also want to look into different content management systems such as Drupal, Joomla, WordPress, and types of web solution. For example, you have your social, e-commerce, blogs, and other types of system. So there are many things to learn, including getting data from external sources such as Graph API, YouTube API, Facebook, Google Maps, and so on. In summary, there's a significant amount to learn in relation to web alone. There's the database side, server-side scripting, different languages for that. The controller scripting, again, different languages according to your architecture. The view and client-side scripting, You have the server itself and client frameworks such as Bootstrap, and you have templates as well. Then you have the testing tools for full stack testing and validation tools for your web page. You have hosting, operating systems. Now that has an implication because, for example, Linux is case sensitive. Just thought about that. And if you are developing your website on Windows and you have, for example, uppercase, say .png, and in your script you refer to it as lowercase, that won't work when you transfer your website onto Linux. So that has implications. And then you have the different control panels which allow you to manage your service, and that is personal preference. You have to have multiple browsers and multiple devices in order to test your website. And finally, you have the graphical design issues and compression and file formats. So there is so much to learn, and you may need to focus in on certain technologies or a certain aspect of web development. For example, in some cases you will find some people just prefer to do the front end development and they will be called front end developers. Or you may be required to be a full stack developer, in which case you would need to learn how to implement the model view and controller and maybe more as well. In some cases it might just be that you focus on certain technologies, so you might be a full stack developer using Microsoft technology or just using PHP. So there's a lot to cover there. There's a lot for you to learn, and I wish you well in learning whatever it is you're interested in terms of web development. But that was just to give you an overview, just to make sure you are aware of all of the different things that you can look into.